um, for participating today for our social equity cannabis permit application process orientation. I want to mention a few things first. If you didn't participate in our standard process orientation yesterday, it was recorded and it will be on our website. Even if you decide to apply for social equity, at the end of that orientation yesterday, there was a question and answers, and so you might want to listen into those questions and answers. We might have different questions today. Let's see. Next, this is the overview of our agenda for today. So we'll start out with introductions, have some background and key information, go through the actual application procedures document, and then we'll do a demonstration on the application system. If you haven't checked that out yet, you can see what that looks like. And then at the end, we'll have a question and answer period. So I'm going to ask if you could please not raise your hand, don't type any questions into the Q&A until we get to that question screen, just because your questions might be answered as we go through the slides. And that way, when we get to that, I'm going to start out with, I have a few questions that were emailed to me ahead of time. And then the written Q&A questions, I'll start out with those. But if you wait on entering those questions, then when we get there, we could just focus on the questions that haven't been answered yet. Okay, so starting out with introduction. So my name is Jennifer Reese. I'm the project manager for cannabis in the city manager's office. I'd also like to introduce my boss, Tim Orman. If he's not on the line yet, he will be at some point. He's the chief of staff to the mayor, and he has been integral to the development of the cannabis regulatory framework in Fresno from the beginning of the process. Also, on our panel today, we have participating representatives from HDL. HDL is a consultant for the city. They've assisted us in developing our application procedures and regulatory framework. So from HDL, we have Mr. David McPherson, Mr. Tim Cromartie, and Mr. Matt Eaton. Last but not least, we have a representative from OpenGov. OpenGov is the company that provides our application portal. So Mr. Tom Crosby later in the presentation will do the demonstration of that. So I'll start off with a little bit of background. On December 13th, 2018, the Fresno City Council adopted the Cannabis Retail Business and Commercial Cannabis Business Ordinance. It was amended on January 30th, June 25th, and September 24th. If you'd like to see what those amendments were, you can go to the city's website on City Council's page and agendas. Look at the agenda and you'll be able to see the information and topic there. The current ordinance authorizes 14 total cannabis retail businesses within the city. That's 2 per council district for retail. An additional 7 may be authorized by city council resolution, and a minimum of 1, maximum of 2 of every 7 will be awarded to a social equity applicant. Delivery services are only authorized for a storefront retail location. So I added that. That was a question we had yesterday. We do not have delivery only permits in Fresno. So if you want to do delivery, you would apply for a storefront retail. The ordinance also authorizes 16 commercial cannabis businesses, which is what we call all the non-retail type, and that includes cultivation, distribution, manufacturing, or non-retail micro business. There is no specific number of each type of those, just 16 total. A minimum of 1 and a maximum of 2 of every 8 of these permits will be awarded to an equity applicant, and there is no limit on testing laboratories. For zoning, these are the zones that are eligible for retail. You can find that in the ordinance. there's a link to the ordinance on our website, which I'll have for you later in the slides as well. And in addition, for retail, all buildings in which cannabis retail business is located shall be no closer than 800 feet from any property boundary containing sensitive use. So sensitive use is defined in the ordinance, but essentially it's schools, daycares, parks, youth centers. Zoning for the commercial cannabis retail is described here, and it is light industrial or heavy industrial zones, and they must meet all of the requirements for development in those zones and be no closer than 1,000 feet from any property boundary containing sensitive use. Fees. I've listed the fees here to give you an idea of what they are for the standard applications. However, pursuant to the Fresno Municipal Code 93316B6, qualified social equity applicant fees will be waived. Social equity and local preference. So it is the intent of the City of Fresno to promote equitable ownership and employment opportunities in the cannabis industry, to decrease the disparities in life outcomes for marginalized communities, and to provide opportunities for local residents to compete for cannabis business permits. So we've already had some questions come through about qualifying because both social equity and local preference have a 51% ownership requirement, and we've had some questions relating to that. So we're going to be issuing a statement to clarify this further, and we'll post it on our website. But I'm going to ask David to expand on this a little more and give some examples. David, are you muted?
Oh, yes, I am. David, thank you. Yeah, so just in short, just be prepared that as you're looking at how you're going to strategically look on scoring and be qualified for social equity applicant or who you partner with, is that the city is going to be providing some additional document and some review of the documents, or during the process that there's no manipulations of any kind of predator type agreements. So if you create operation agreements, or in the business of some companies or with some applicants or owners that are looking for you to give up your rights to your control, either from a social equity applicant, even though you may be the 51%, but you don't really control the 51%, or how there's limitations to you, or your participation in there to try to be creative. You will be asked to sign a document. Any applicant will be, as will for the local preference. And this will also be done for the standard applications as well. You will get something provided to you in the future after the Q&As are prepared and the documentation is prepared as well. So we just want you to be aware of that and mindful as you think about how you're going to partner with individuals and how you're going to strategically approach this process.
Thank you. Okay, social equity eligibility. So this information is in the procedure documents. It's also in the ordinance. However, I went ahead and highlight it here because it is obviously a very important part, and probably the first part that you need to look at to determine if you qualify as a social equity applicant. There are 6 different ways that you can qualify. So it's listed here. The first is a low-income household, and you have either a past conviction for a cannabis crime or an immediate family member with a past conviction for a cannabis crime. And then the second one you can see there, low-income household and a zip code identified as at least 60% according to Cal EnviroScreen. That is a website you can pull up and see, search according to zip code, and then either A or B. I've noted here low-income household. The definition of that is whose gross income does not exceed 80% of the area median income for Fresno County as determined annually by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. The second part of that are items 3 through 6 here. Low income and either 5 years cumulative residency in Cal EnviroScreen at 70% or 10 years cumulative residency in a zip code identified by Cal EnviroScreen. And number 4, a business with no less than 51% ownership by individuals who meet criteria 1 and 2 above. 5, a cannabis social enterprise with no less than 51% ownership of individuals who meet criteria 1 and 2, or number 6, an individual with a membership interest in a cannabis business formed as a cooperative. So qualified social equity applicants will receive technical assistance for their application pursuant to 93316B6. These are the subjects that are eligible for technical assistance. So that's business plan development, satisfying the social policy requirement, satisfying neighborhood compatibility requirements, your detailed plan identifying your specific business and social goals, assistance securing business locations prior to or during the application process, assistance securing capital investments, excluding loans and grants from the city, and assistance in recruiting, training, retention of a qualified and diverse workforce. Technical assistance is provided by a qualified vendor that is experienced in the cannabis industry. And once applicants submit their documentation demonstrating that they are an eligible social equity applicant, then they'll be provided instructions on accessing the technical assistance. In addition, there's the establishment of the Fresno Community Reinvestment Fund. So I'm not going to read all of this language. It is also in the procedure documents, but this is a fund created to help the equity businesses in the city. And so once it is established and funded, which we may have, other non-equity businesses contributing to this fund, and in addition, potentially equity grants. This is a fund to support equity applicants, after they're awarded the permit in their continuing needs to develop their business and make sure that they can be successful. It's also something that you can consider because equity applicants also have the community benefits and investments section of their application. So if that's something, once the business is successful that you'd like to contribute to continue benefiting the equity program, that is also something you can consider, although it's not required. This is an overview of estimated timeline. It is only an estimate because it's going to be impacted by the number of applications we receive and the amount of time that it takes us to review all of those applications. So this is our best guess estimate. This blue section here is the standard application window, which is 45 days. As you'll see in the key dates here and in the procedure documents, social equity applicants have a little more time to submit their materials, and they have multiple due dates so that you also have time to access and benefit from the technical assistance for the areas that you need help with. The green period here is through December through the end of February is when we expect we'll be reviewing the applications. And that does include social equity applications. You can see the first due date for social equity applicants will be November 13th. That is when you need to submit your standard application form, which we'll see when we do the demonstration in the application portal. It's all your basic information. And you need to submit documentation demonstrating that you're eligible as a social equity applicant. So documentation meeting those criteria that we just reviewed, whichever one of those you claim in order to demonstrate you're eligible for this application process. The second due date is after you will have time to access technical assistance. January 8th is when we will like to see the sections 1, 2, 3, and 7. Those sections are described in Appendix A of the application procedures, and those are due January 8th. On January 29th is when we'll ask you to submit your proposed location and proof of capitalization or a plan for your capitalization. And then going back to the overall timeline here, the purple in March and April is when we expect to conduct interviews. That's for the standard application process and also the social equity application process. So they're basically on the same timeline, even though social equity applicants have more time to submit their materials. And this pink section here is the city manager's final review, which at that point, they would issue preliminary decisions to award a permit. And that preliminary decision will allow you to start the CUP, conditional use permit process, which is this orange section here. That could be up to 75 business days or sometimes even longer to complete that process. But at the same time, you'll also complete your other final requirements, like submitting your safety and security plan, your insurance, getting your facility ready, getting your state cannabis license, and your business license tax certificate. So you don't need to start any of those processes until you have your preliminary decision to be awarded a permit. This is our website. If you've registered for this webinar, you've probably already found it, but I just wanted to mention that there's a lot of other resources on this site. And if you have general questions, please reference this site first. Once this application process opened, our office has, as you can imagine, a lot more calls and emails with questions. So if everybody checks the website for general information first, that allows us to focus and get back to you a little quicker for those of you that have unanswered or more specific questions. In addition to that, any new information, as mentioned, we'll be producing frequently asked questions documents. Those will be posted on our website. So the idea here is, everybody having access to the same information. So we're going to try to keep that website up to date as much as possible at all times. So that should always be your first go-to point if you're looking for some specific information. Okay, before we get into the procedures document, I have a few frequently asked questions or FYI information that I wanted to go over first. The first being local preference. So this is something that is mentioned in the ordinance, that there will be a local preference criteria, and that criteria is satisfied in 2.5 of Appendix A, and it says, describe the extent to which the commercial cannabis business will be a locally managed enterprise whose owners and or managers reside within or own a commercial cannabis business or commercial business within the city of Fresno for at least 1 year prior to March 2nd. And we consider this criteria fully met if 51% of the ownership meets that criteria. So I know we had a lot of questions yesterday about, if there's less than, or if there's county versus city and different percentage, and going back to the statement earlier, we will issue some clarifying information on this point as well. Next, a couple points here. There needs to be a separate application for each permit type. So that was a question that we received. And we suggest using a 12-point font with either Times New Roman or Arial, and that is just so that our reviewers can review it easily. If the font's too small or if it's in a hard to read font, it makes it really difficult to get through. So That's our suggestion. Any diagrams that you include need to be legible. I know the document references like a paper size. In the beginning, we were planning for a paper submission process, but now we have the electronic system. So that paper size isn't necessarily important. It will be in PDF, but sometimes, especially if you scan a document in PDF and you try to zoom, it can become difficult to read. So just make sure that you check that and that it is easy to read. There is criteria that mentions living wage. So this is a reference as far as determining living wage that we'll be looking at. And so we offer it here for you to look at as well. The next is, can an in-house security consultant qualify as a professional consultant? And that answer is, if your in-house security person is a qualified professional security expert who possesses such expertise and it can be demonstrated by preparing a response to the scoring criteria, this would be acceptable. That brings us to the application procedures. So David McPherson from HDL is going to review that with us. I'm going to pull it up on the screen here.
Thank you, Jen.
All right.
So two things that I want to mention up front that came up a couple of times in yesterday's presentation was people were referring to dates or forms or webinars that may have been either not part of the city's program or things that were up to the process itself. So again, reemphasize what Jennifer said is rely on the website information here, the link here of information, or contacting with staff directly should you be in doubt of any dates, questions, or anything that's not consistent with the procedures that we show before you. I think there was one posted, and then when the orientations got suspended, that they were removed. So if you printed something which is not from yesterday's date or the day before when it was set on the website, just be cognizant about that you want to make sure you've got the correct information. With that said, the second point I wanted to make is if you look a little lower, Jennifer, in the red bold, a little more, it's going to delete right there, where it says applicants should monitor the city's webpage for any additional information, FAQs, or updates. In emphasis added is the responsibility of the applicant to stay informed of any changes or updates on the application process. So as we went over yesterday, as we will today, and you've got questions, we answer them. There may be a modification to that. There may be a clarity there. We're going to try not to answer questions that we're not 100% sure of, and we will provide it in writing, and therefore rely on the responses to those. So when they get posted, go back and make sure that it's consistent with what you heard today, or if you go back and watch the video because you're not actually watching it today. So I can't overemphasize that. So moving on to the amendments of the application and what can be earmarked. So the goal of amending this application is we're trying to be mindful of not disqualifying someone from minor issues. For example, you submit your forms, they're not digitally signed or signed in the PDF, it's missing a date that's required for the signature to be done, things of that nature, payments of a receipt. You scan something and it's 15 pages, all of a sudden page 9 and 10 is missing in a section or a criteria that you're providing. That's not what they want to do, that there might be, if there's an opportunity there to be notified and to remedy those situations. But in any case, do not think that, oh, I'm running out of time, I'm not going to submit one of the sections, I've got 3 out of 4 done, or wherever the numbers are, and I'll submit it thinking that they're just going to tell me that I'm missing a section and I can go back and submit it later. That will not be something that can be amended. You will be disqualified if you missed a complete section and things of that nature. The next component I wish to share with you is the limitations. So the limitations have two things. One is any business owner possessing an ownership interest of this is limited to 2 permits that they can submit for. And in the second part of this is that if you're applying for the social equity application, you cannot also be a listed owner on one of the standard applications and vice versa. And that came up yesterday as well. We clearly try to put it here so you're aware of that. And then the other thing, part of this limitation that's not really specific here, but is in the ordinance, a question came up. If you are operating a business prior to the application process or in the past, that could have been a co-op and collective or were told to stop and cease doing that, can you apply for this? And I would like to refer you to section 9-3318A3, which talks about from the point of the application process, if you're open after this. So if you apply, get your application in on the deadline, and you're found to be operating something illegal after that date, then you will be disqualified under that section. So make sure you understand that and make sure none of your partners are associated with this is in that position. So the next component here is the number of applications, excuse me, the number of applications that are eligible. So the city will be issuing a minimum of 1 and a maximum of 2 out of every 7 retail businesses, and a minimum of 1 or a maximum of 2 of 8 permits for non-retail under the social equity thing, and that's the ordinance as well. We also want to emphasize the reservation of rights so that the city could make a determination for various reasons stated here in the articles in the ordinance, which won't go into great detail. But the one thing that I want to emphasize to you is some of the things about do's and don'ts that Jennifer mentioned earlier, that in the bullets here, the second bullet says, the application or proposal does not contain the required elements, exhibits, nor is it organized in the required format. So make sure whatever section that you put in here, you submit under the procedures and the process, that you do in an orderly way so that not looking all over for something that needs to be in the area where it needs to be, and that you comply with the page count, you comply with some of the requirements that you're being asked to, so that you won't get disqualified on those technicalities. So moving along on submittal requirements. So if for some of you that may have participated in the presentation yesterday, this is a little different than yesterday's. The standard applicants are being asked to submit everything at once. You are not in this process. Standard applicants are getting scored on certain things. This process has different things to be helpful to you. So one is you can see where the responses to sections 1 through 3, not sections 1 through 7. Only those 3 are required on this first step. And you're limited to a different page numbers. You're only at 125 pages versus the other one is different. So you want to make sure that you're reading the right procedures and you're complying for consistency of what will be asked from you. Jennifer went over the portal, and we're going to have Tom talk about it in a little bit about the portal, but how to get everything in there. But you need to put the information in there in his process for that. So I'll kind of defer that to Tom on that procedure stuff. The other thing that we want to share with you is that when you submit this application, the deadline is that you are not to have any more interaction with any of the electeds or policymakers on this. You are only to address anything to staff. If you are found to do so, there's evidence of that, then you could be disqualified. And I assure you that some of your competitors in this process may point that out, and do not want you to get a little complacent on that, thinking that no one's going to know, and then you get disqualified after a lot of hard work you put into this. The next thing is what we're calling the zoning inquiry letter. This is something that you're going to need to provide, and when we talk about the steps, because it's later in the process, it's not on the front end of it, that you will be asked to get a zoning verification letter to confirm that you meet all the sensitive buffer requirements, and that the property that you are looking at is properly zoned in this process. And this goes into a little detail about what it does and what it doesn't do as far as procedurally requesting it, the information, and then getting a verification in that. The other point made in there is the due date on that, the 13th. So you have to have this in by that due date, because of the next process is requiring that to be done in the phase 3. So keep in mind that there is a time frame for this, and as we mentioned to the others yesterday, is that don't think you can run in the day before. You want to give yourself about 2 weeks to start asking for that. Do your research now, start preparing for that, so that you're ready for that.
David, well. Can I just mention, this is actually a typo. The November 13th is not the due date. We'll need to correct that. That was what it was before. So the zoning verification is due when the location information is due, and that is January 29th. So we'll make this correction.
Very good. Okay. And on that note, if you see something that looks out of place or inconsistent with our discussion or like that, we would appreciate if you let us know sooner than earlier, so we can get that corrected and make everyone's life a little easier.
I think we missed the background.
Yes, I have my note here, so I was gonna go, but thank you. I know you covered it a little bit. So the background, Jennifer covered it a little bit. You can look at it under that section cited there under 9-3318C. So the background form that's going to the package needs to be submitted up front, because it does two things specifically for the social equities. One is there's criteria that can make you a qualified applicant. And so that information may be on that background form that they can use as a determination for that. However, they will not validate everything on here until you are actually in the final process. And we'll talk about that when we get to the phase 4 component in there, just to kind of streamline and keep you moving along without slowing you down or reduce some of your costs, such as the $69 fee you see there will not be required on the front end until you're actually, you are in that phase 4 component of there. So again, we'll discuss that in a little more detail in phase 4. So if we can move to the social equity fees. So part of it, like I just mentioned to you, by having that background form filled out, it allows staff to evaluate you if you're going to meet one of the criteria that Jennifer went over in the presentation that she did earlier, and is listed on the criteria for eligibility on the procedure guidelines. And so they need that to look at that. If you meet that criteria, then the fees are waived. If you don't meet that criteria, or you think you're not going to meet that criteria, you still want to apply for a permit, you may want to shift over to the standard application process if you think that's going to be the case, and do that timely, because again, it has different rules that we're looking here. And then of course, we're already having the meeting today, and you registered and so forth. So this is what the Jennifer went over on the site, so I'm not going to go into detail of this. It is in the ordinance as well. And so look at that, and then that will be important in order for you to qualify and show evidence of that in some of the original submittals. Okay. So The due date here, again, because you're only asking for sections 1 through 3, it's just basically first to find out if you're going to be eligible for this. So the staff needs to do that and know that. If you do, then you'll be notified that you get to move on to phase 3. And then that's where some of the assistance and guidance comes in for this. And if you move on there, you will be asked to prepare, and you can get some assistance as far as the categories of information that's listed here. We want to emphasize to you that this is only to provide you guidance and give you some directions and assistance in how you approach, where to find information, what could be looked for, or things that you want to prepare as an outline. It is not the technical assistance to actually draft your submittal information on here. So you could plan a little bit ahead. You can start creating your questions. You can start looking at what you think you're going to do, maybe frame it a little bit so you walk in here a little more prepared in advance once you get past that initial application information there. And if you have additional questions, you come and plan with that. So the application will include on this phase, again, sections 1, 2, 3, and 7, which is in the appendix. And we'll cover that when we get to it through this process. Should you make it there, and again, this section here is not trying to kick someone out. It's not going to be scored because since you are getting help, we don't want some think that they got great assistance, some didn't. The goal here is really to get you to a point where you can draft things together. It is a pass or fail, and you being able to demonstrate that you have an understanding of this and that you can do this and to help you be successful as well. And she's highlighted the due date there, so make sure that you do follow that. Please do look that it says 4 o'clock, not 5 o'clock. We've had issues in the past. Staff needs a little transition time because technically they would be off or systems close at 5 o'clock. So make sure that you get there before 5 o'clock or submittals before this online for the cutoffs on things when you're submitting this on the system. So if you are successful and you pass that, again, pass or fail, you move to phase 3. Phase 3 is then looking at the next things that we're trying to not require you to put a lot of time in the front end. And that is the proposed location as far as giving you a chance to go research, find that, execute some kind of lease agreement or letter of intent or some kind of other agreement, or if you own the property, that's great. However, I wish to emphasize with you is because you have a lot of competition with the standard applicants and you got competition within the social equities, is that we would encourage you to start looking now, kind of eliminate scenarios, look at scenarios so that you don't get to this position and you've done a lot of hard work, but you've got no location to even be considered to move on through the process. So keep that in mind. And then also proof of the capital. You will see here as part of the application, final application, they're going to be looking at you, how you demonstrate in some of your capital development, your pro forma plan, but also that you have a minimum of $400,000 in capital. Again, for the social equity applicants, this is more of a recommendation than a bottom line. However, you need to demonstrate how you're going to be able to be sustainable in getting through your permitting and your projecting and your tenant improvements and getting that lease that you could be sitting on an empty building for 6 to 10 months, as Jennifer showed you on the timeline of doing things. If you execute some kind of agreement with a property owner, he's not going to give you that, he or she's not going to give that to you for free to sit on. You're going to be paying rent on that, so you need to be able to show all these things that are very critical. If you can't do that, meet that kind of criteria, then you need to have some kind of demonstrate a plan on how you're going to be able to do it on the short term, again, to hold on to the property, but also how you're going to get capital through a transitional period in order to be sustainable and get to that ribbon cutting and get your business open. And you'll note there about another date for that as well. Okay, with that said, so let's say everyone's got to a point, then depending on the number of applicants, it is the goal of the city that they're going to have a maximum of 10 interviews for retail applicants. Ideally, that's what they're hoping they can get to. If the number is of qualified applicants that get to that process is higher than that, let's say it's 25, then it may be subject to a lottery process depending on the numbers. And that is for each category. So if we had 25 social equity applicants and only 8 of them are retail and 6 or 8 of them are retail, and you get the balance of it are for all other activities, and it doesn't hit those caps for the interviews for the categories, then you could possibly everyone be eligible for interview because it doesn't have the limitations to that. Okay, and of course because of the 20%, the total that will be interviewed, the 2 processes will make sure it does not exceed that 20%. So phase 4 is the interview is done. The selection committee. In phase 4, the selection committee will then interview the applicants. There will be an emphasis on certain things, and that is where the investment plan comes in to be looked at. We're looking at the community benefits and how you approach your community benefits. It's important. The staff's going to review your application process when that needs to be submitted for the interview process, and then also for any issues they have in your application that they might want to address with you, strengths and weaknesses, or just clarifications of things that you propose, so they have a better understanding when they get to interview you for where that's at. And then they will also be looking at that as consideration of a local preference that is noted here in section 9-3317A, and that will be taken into consideration based on the strength of the field the selection committee is reviewing in the process. Then once you get through that, Jennifer outlined, and I won't go into too much detail, I'd like to get to the specific questions, but once that recommendation list is provided to the city manager, there will be an eligibility list in case somebody gets disqualified on the background, somebody decides to remove themselves from the process or something happens, then there's an eligibility list and the staff can move to the next, the city managers can move to the next recommendation that he or she wishes to bring up and to be awarding a permit. So you will also notice in there that the safety and security plan and the insurance requirement is not in the front side of this. Again, we're trying to be mindful and reduce the cost of having to hire a consultant on the front end. So if we had 50 applicants and you're spending a lot of money on this, you could be exhausting your remedies and resources. So if you were awarded a permit, there's a few things that do that. Once you've been advised that you are a successful candidate, you will have to complete the background. That's where we talked about you may or may not get disqualified. So that's when it's actually done. You will have to provide a safety plan. You will have to provide a security plan and proof of insurance for your business operation as you move into the planning phases of this. So the next step after that would be going to the planning, and just emphasis that this process does not automatically guarantee that you're approved with a permit without completing that process. So the last thing I want to talk about this on here is before we move into the appendix side of this is the establishment of the community investment plan. So when you look at your community benefit strategy and how you're wanting to approach this, is that the city has established this community reinvestment fund, and part of that criteria will be looking at how you will fund or support this plan, even though you're also going to get the benefits from this, but it's going to be looking at where there's an opportunity for you in your process differently, how you get back as well as receive during being awarded a permit. And so we'll talk about that when we do look at the appendix. And then the contact information is here, but it's also on the website and on the very documents that were provided to you. So as noted in the various stages of the application, and we kind of highlighted here in red, is there's going to be different elements that will be submitted different times as we talked through, we went through the steps. So the owner qualifications is, again, the owners. A question came up, or what about managers? What about employees? This is to look at the owners that will have the responsibility to control and direction of the business and be financially invested in there. So it's important that the qualifications that you look at, and in this case, we're looking at qualifications. The question came up, well, are you looking for someone that has experience in cannabis? It is your team that you're building. You're looking at people with financial backgrounds. You're looking at people in operational backgrounds for the specific type of permit you're applying for. You're looking for someone that understands regulations. There's people that come from all kinds of gamuts that could be associated with that. So it's not just cannabis, but it's your qualifications to run the type of business for various components that you are putting together in that component. The pro forma for at least 3 years, 1.4. We are looking for the revenue and the cost regarding that. So we don't need a P&L and the details regarding that. We just want you to demonstrate that, hey, if you say that you got $200,000, but yet you do the math on your property lease for a year and it's $400,000, and you still got costs of build out, security, consultants, permitting fees, and all that. We want you to be able to demonstrate that you've thought this out for 3 years of actually the reality of cost and how you're going to get to that. Okay. So the next thing I just want to point out related to that is you will notice that there's specific, we've bolded different categories: retail, distribution, manufacturing, testing labs. Look at that if you're applying for one of those functionalities, that you need to also include those in there. If you're applying for a micro business, yesterday we mentioned that if you're applying for a micro business, then you're going to want to include all of those, because you're doing all three components of a micro business: cultivation, manufacturing, and distribution. And again, remember, you cannot apply for the retail side in a micro business because they're zoned in two different areas, as Jennifer went over earlier in the presentation. So as we move through that, the social policy and local enterprise. Question came up with there was that is the city requiring or looking for a certain union that you have to be negotiating the union agreement? The answer is no. There is no specific unions that you need to have an agreement with. You're just required to be have a labor agreement with a bona fide labor group organization. 2.1 talks about living wage. Jennifer mentioned the link to that in the PowerPoint, which will be on the website as well, of where that link is, of where they are looking for. It's important that you reference that link and not Google other sources, because other sources will come with different types of calculations in there. So you want to make sure you're consistent with the source that the city will be basing it on, and that if you're looking at how you're going to build your living wage models or present your materials, that it's based on that and not some other potential websites. So 2.7, the only thing I want to point there, because if you've attended council meetings in the past, state law is a minimum of 20 employees. It was reduced at one time lower than that, but the final ordinance adoption that has been recent is 5 employees. So if you have 5 employees or more, you're going to meet, you qualify for that requirement for the labor peace agreement. So make sure you understand that. So then we want to look at the residency, if you're going to get credit for that. And I think Jennifer, because it was a FAQ question, she went into more detail about that. So just keep that in mind. That's where she was referring to in the process or in the requirement, and the date in which that had to occur to be eligible for them. So the neighborhood compatibility comment in here, questions, it's come up more than once regarding, do you have to hire a specific person liaison for the program or whatever? No, in your org chart, you just need to identify who person's going to be that. If you look at 3.2, it says describe how the CCB will be managed to avoid that. So it doesn't mean you got to hire someone specific to that. You just need to designate who that's going to be and how the management team will oversee all the concerns or issues with this whole section in there. And as we mentioned earlier before, the safety plan, and we noted it there that it's only required in phase 5. Same with the security plan. You do not need to put this in your package. And so it's, again, because you'll see it in the standards are required to do that. You are not required to do that until you are being notified that you're being awarded a permit. So that is just there for you to know, in the point that that's in the phase 4 or phase 5 component of there, not at the beginning. So here's the location. Again, we mentioned that the location and the community investment component, the location component of that is required in the phase 3 component and not here. I think we talked enough about what that is and the timelines for that. The emphasis I really want to point here is looking at when things are on this appendix of when they're required to be included in there. So it's important that you do include that. I think on here on the computer, there's a thing here on the brownfields land. Jennifer touched upon this a little when she went over the zoning elements in there. So if you want to refer to that on the slide PowerPoint thing, then you can look at there on the comment she made, and if you watch the video again related to those issues, so you're aware of that, of what they're looking for there and the clarity of it. I know Jennifer mentioned this, and I just emphasis added on it because this is going to be submitted online about the fonts. She mentioned about the fonts. Really, again, the important is that when the evaluators are reading it, if it's blurred or hard to read, that's where you could get impacted by deductions, not so much of anything else. So it will be important that any data or statistic or diagram be reflective, that they can read that. The last thing I want to point out here, which we didn't touch upon yet, is there's concerns of the sensitivity of all this information. So you'll see the 2 asterisks here. So the first asterisk really refers to the information that you're going to provide in your financial information under your business plan. If you think that there's things that you wish to be confidential, you can put her on the water, on the water background on the water drop on, confidential or proprietary. If you think it is going to be that, but we want to also remind you that at the end of the day is the city will be reviewing the information to see if it complies with the government code 6254, which means that some of that may not be considered confidential to the degree that they have to require to do it, even though you may think of it as some, but most likely anything with financial documents, records, proprietary things that are associated with that will be redacted or removed so that it is not provided to any PRA, public records request. The security plan most likely would meet that criteria, But again, talking about a lot of things in your security plan, but doesn't really go into detail, things that would be confidential as far as impacting actually someone knowing about your business should you get it up and running, that would be of concern. So make sure that if you feel that is, put that in the water drop markings, or put it at the bottom of the footer, so that at least it red flags to staff should they have to go through a public records request, that they can be a little more red flag to review the information before that final determination is made. So with that said, I will turn it back over to Jennifer to go to the next step of the agenda before we get into the Q&As.
Thank you. I just made a couple notes I wanted to mention. You had mentioned in section 7, the vacant buildings, brownfields, blighted areas. We did talk about that in the standard orientation yesterday, but I haven't referenced the section yet in this presentation, so I will do that. The question was, what was the definition of a vacant building? The city actually has a vacant building registry. Property owners are required to register if their building is going to be vacant or has been vacant for 30 days. So they would be on that registry. Brownfields land, we're looking at the EPA definition of that. Don't have it in front of me right now, but we'll have that in the FAQ. And then for the city has a blighted buildings ordinance, that is section 10-617. So that gives you an idea of what would be considered a blighted building. In addition, I don't think I mentioned earlier, but the in the standard application process in the social policy section, applicants are not required, but are recommended to describe if they offer to be an incubator for social equity operators. What that means is they may provide mentoring, they may provide a certain percentage of shelf space for social equity business products, or they may provide other resources to help equity businesses. So we're hopeful that we will have a number of the businesses offer to do that, which would be another resource for the equity businesses that do get a permit and are working on making their business successful. That's in addition to the Community Reinvestment Fund, which would offer financial assistance for the business operations in the future. So let me bring up the PowerPoint really quick, and then we will transition to the portal demonstration. So submitting the application, we're going to have a demonstration on that in just a second, but these were a few questions that came up yesterday, so I wanted to point them out before we get into the portal demonstration. The question was, can multiple applications be submitted through a single viewpoint ID? And the answer to that is yes. The viewpoint ID will allow you to begin as many applications as you want, but you do need to follow the limitations in the procedures. So it doesn't have to be the business owner. The business owner doesn't have to be the one establishing the viewpoint ID. I just wanted to make that clear. And then for the background check, if you have more than one owner, or the owner is not the person that's filling out the application, that is okay, but they will go to the main page of the portal, which we'll see in a minute, and scroll down and complete the background form separately for each owner. And you'll want to note the application, either the project name or the application ID, so that you can connect your background check with your application for each of your owners. Okay, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tom Crosby from OpenGov and ask that he share his screen and do a demonstration on the application portal for us.
Excellent. Thank you, Jennifer. And I did want to be on video with everybody during the presentation, but it'll just make the software run a lot smoother if I keep it off for now. I will resume video when the question and answer period does come about. But I did want to start here by beginning on the Office of Cannabis Oversight and the Fresno webpage for this. So in order to access the OpenGov portal, what I'm going to do is simply scroll down here to just below this big blue box. And I'm going to click on the first link that I see underneath cannabis business information on fresnoca.viewpointcloud.com. From there, we're going to be able to manage our account and start our applications. And in order to first begin by signing up for an OpenGov account, what we're going to do, we have multiple options for that actually. We can come up here to click sign up. And here we can sign up using the secure portal. And what I'm going to do there is I'll enter in a valid email address, I'll enter in a password, and then click sign up. So when you do enter a new password here for the first time, it will give you some requirements. It needs to be at least 8 characters in length, and it should contain at least a lower letter, an uppercase letter, as well as a number. The other way that you can start an account, if that's not very obvious to you, sorry about that. Let's go back to Fresno CA. So the other way that you can start an account is to come down here to start a project. And without an account, you can actually start what is essentially a questionnaire for beginning your permitting process. On this step of the application process, you'll be able to see some additional, facilitating context that Jennifer has provided around the social equity application process. So please do make sure to review this before you start. But I'll click next here, and then I'm just going to be asked 2 simple questions. Am I an owner of a cannabis business that would like to apply for a permit in the city of Fresno? I'll say yes here. And based on the information on the previous screen, do you qualify as a social equity applicant and wish to apply for a cannabis business permit through the social equity application process? I'll click yes again. And this is obviously specific to the social equity application process. I'll click next here, and this has now started my project. And I do want to click here to start my project. And now at this point, I can either log in or sign up. So you can get that far in the software and still sign up at this point. And that might actually be the easier process to navigate to the sign up screen. At any point, though, you can log back into your account once you've created it. The system will send you an automated email where you do have to verify that that is an actual address before you continue with your application process. But I'll go ahead and log in here. And once you've logged in or signed up for your account, you can now give your project a name. And it's very important that we, so what I'm going to do is, let's see here. I'll now go ahead and start my project. And it is very important here that you do remember your name of your project in order to track that in perpetuity. You're also going to be issued out a unique project identifier, in this case, R1BDDM. So do write this project code down. You can always navigate back to this project by clicking My Account up here in the top right-hand corner. So again, do keep track of your project name as well as your project identifier, R1BDDM. From there, you can start any of your individual applications, and you will be required to do your background form application at one point in the process, but I do want to go ahead and start filling out the social equity cannabis business permit application first and foremost for today's demonstration. So all I'm going to do there is click start. And that's going to pull up all of my contact information directly into the application form. And this is if you're a returning user. This is all of the information that you're required to provide during your first initial application process. And from there, every time that you log in and start a new application, all of this information will pull directly into the application itself. The one thing that you can't change once you've created an account is your email address. And that's because that's your unique identifier with the city of Fresno. I'll click next here. And from there on out, you're going to further kind of answer questions around your application process. And again, the system's going to ask here if you do qualify as a social equity applicant and you do want to apply. I'll make the yes selection here and click next. From there, I can provide information on my annual income, whether I have a past conviction, whether I claim eligibility on a family member having a previous conviction, whether I represent a cannabis social enterprise, and whether I have a membership interest in a cannabis cooperative. I'll click next here. And what I wanted to do, so I'm not going to fill out the entire application, but I did start a draft earlier. And I'm going to, that's a good time to point out that if I do click my account up in the top right-hand corner here, that's going to open all of my draft applications within the system. And those are going to be sequentially ordered. So this is the one that I started earlier, and here is the one that we just started. I also did want to point out that if you click here on the left on your dashboard, this is going to be all of your applications and all of your pending action items within the OpenGov system. Here you can see any messages that are coming back and forth between yourself and the city. You can view and edit your profile here. Down here, you can see all of the projects that you're currently engaged in. And just as a reminder, the project is how we ended up in this application form in the first place by answering those two questions. So if I do click back down here to the previous application that I'd started, I now see all applications associated with that project. And here I very simply have entered back into an application that I had previously started filling out. So the important thing to remember here is that all of your information is going to be saved over time. You can at any time click save draft and exit if you need to go back and find additional information, or if you, if you do something comes up and you need to, pause the application process, you can click save draft and exit, and you'll be able to come back to where you left off in the application at that time. The really important thing about this platform is that all information is going to be saved automatically. So regardless of whether your browser crashes or if you lose internet connection, the information that you entered up until that point will always be available. And then finally, on the last step of the application, you will be provided a place to enter your digital signature and sign, enter in your title information. And if you do have any additional questions down here, there is a phone number provided for you. I do want to get to the last step of the application just to show you where you will upload any and all attachments. And on this screen here, you can upload all of the attachments that will be supporting your initial application through OpenGov. All you need to do to upload an attachment is click on the blue upload button and then choose the corresponding file. That should upload pretty quickly, and you can click here and make sure by clicking this link that you have uploaded the correct document in line with that attachment that's being requested there. I'm now going to flip over to one more screen, and this is the last thing I wanted to share with everybody on the presentation today. And here's what the view would look like after submission. And over on the left here, you're going to have a workflow status bar, and this is going to tell you where within your application the review process actually is. And at any step of any part of the application process, you can click here to message the reviewer. And here I could say something like, I need help with attachment XYZ. Can you please assist? And if you send that message in, Somebody associated with the city of Fresno and this review process will be able to respond directly back to you. And you're going to receive automated emails throughout this process, keeping you apprised of not only when steps become active, but when a city official responds to you. And with that, would love to open it up to any questions and the remainder of Jennifer's presentation.
Could you go back really quick to the ownership screen and just show how they enter it if there's multiple owners?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And then also I want to, on this screen, can I mention one thing here as well?
Yeah.
So you'll notice that the only one that says required is the supporting eligibility documents. That is because that is the only attachment required by the first due date. So by the first due date of November 13th, you need to complete the form that Tom went over with all of the basic information, and you need to attach your supporting eligibility documents. All the other attachments will be due at some point, and you can see in the description, also in the procedures, when those due dates are. So I wanted to mention that, and then if you could just show them the ownership screen.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to go back a couple of steps, and here you can add in as many owners as you need to over this standardized set of data points. Anything with an asterisk will be required, so you won't be able to save this entry without all of the required fields. And I'll just go ahead and fill one of these out. We'll say Joe Smith. He's the CMO at 320 Congress Street in Fresno, CA 96350. Whether or not they've completed their background check already and their ownership percentage. And this is an important point here. And Jennifer, I don't know if you mentioned this already and I just missed it, but remembering that project code or your project name up here is how you're going to associate any additional background check applications with your overall application package. And I'll just click save here. And I've now added in my entry for Joe Smith. But if I do click add owner information again, I'll add in another owner and their ownership percentage.
And the total ownership percentage will need to add up to 100%. So you'll need to enter all of your owners, or if you're the only owner, then you'll put 100%. But if you have more than one, all of them together need to add up to 100%.
Mm-hmm.
There you go.
Yeah, and that's another helpful tip. Just always make sure to read the context that's been built into the application form itself. That will always help guide you through the process. And I did want to come back a couple of screens here to, I know I saw one. There we go. So anytime you see a question mark bubble, you can hover over that, and that will give you additional context around what information is being asked for in that particular data field. And Jennifer, was there anything else that you were hoping that we would cover today?
I think that was it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jennifer, I did have one, if I missed it, was yesterday we had that if it's not the applicant submitting it, if it's maybe a consultant or someone that's filling out, of how it triggers them to even go to the background. Did that get covered?
I did mention it a little earlier in the presentation, but yeah, I can revisit that again just so it's clear.
Maybe Tom could show the scenario while he was kind of doing a demo.
Oh, okay. Tom, could you share your screen again and show how, if the person completing the application is, or if there's other people that need to do an additional background check?
Yeah, absolutely. Could I resume the screen share?
Yes.
All right. Also worth mentioning, you can click the City of Fresno logo up here at any time, and that will bring you back to the homepage here. And if you do need to submit an additional background check, you're going to come down here to Discover Online Services, where you can now click on your background check tile. You can then click Cannabis Business Owner Background Form and click Select. and apply online.
Tom, just as a footnote, the question yesterday is that I'm a consultant and I'm preparing and inputting the information for the applicant. I'm not the applicant. That there's triggers that they do or don't do, and it'll default if they aren't the actual owner filling out the form. That was asked multiple times yesterday.
Yeah, so Tom,
here,
that's in the beginning. He's talking about the one when you start a project and it asks you, are you an owner?
oh, yes. Okay.
So if you say, no, I'm not an owner, then it'll allow you to create the cannabis permit application right there. If you say no, you'll still be able to complete the cannabis permit application, but you will not be asked to do the background check form. And instead, you'll have the business owners go to that main screen Tom just showed and fill out the background form there.
Yeah, and so you'll see if when I start that project with the first answer as no, we're only going to get the application process. And then, you know, at a later date or whenever they're ready, they can come down here to background check and start those applications. And Jennifer, did you want me to show the process of associating that code with this application?
Sure, yeah, that'd be good.
So I'm going to click back here to my account, and I'm going to come down to my projects tab. And I can now click into any project I'm associated with. And this is your unique code. It is case sensitive, so do keep that in mind. I would always suggest just to copy this and put it in an email or send it via text. But if I now click my City of Fresno logo to come back to the main screen and come down here to my background check tile and select my business owner background form and then apply online. Up here, grayed out, you'll see have a project number ? You can click here and paste in that project code and add, and that will automatically tie the application to that project.
Great, thank you.
From there, you're going to be able to fill the application out as normal. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, let me pull up our PowerPoint. Okay, that's going to bring us to our question and answers period. So to start off, I would like to ask that if you, this question period is for the social equity application process. So if you have questions related to the standard process, since that orientation was yesterday, I'll ask you to contact my office separately. If you have questions relating to other aspects of the cannabis framework or comments related to it, I would ask you to contact us separately. We just want to focus on questions relating to the social equity application process during this orientation, because this is going to help us create our frequently asked questions, which we will have available on our website. The goal with that is to make sure that everybody has access to the same information. So as we go along, if there's a question that we need to confirm or get clarification about, we may not answer it today, but we will get that confirmation and clarification, and we will post it in our FAQ document on our website so that everybody has that same information. So the process I'm going to do is I do have about 4 questions that were emailed ahead of time. I'm going to go ahead and answer those first and give you time to type into the Q&A box questions that you have. As we go along, if there's duplicate questions, I'm not going to re-answer the same questions. I'll skip those, and I'll recommend that you, when this webinar is posted, you go back and look at the answers if you missed it. If you need to ask your question verbally for some reason, you can't type it in. Once we get through all the written questions, there is a raise your hand feature if you want to select that. Once we get through all the written questions, then I'll go ahead and check to see if there's anybody that needs to ask their question verbally. Okay, so I'll get started with my few questions that were emailed. The first one is regarding the live scan background checks. What accommodations are being made for owners or operators who are out of state and unable to return to California due to the state COVID-19 pandemic restrictions and qualify as being disabled or vulnerable population. So the requirement of the live scan is not due until phase 5 of the social equity process. So when we reach that point, we'll definitely consider accommodations depending on the situation with the pandemic. Also, I know live scans can be processed at different sites. That's something we'll need to research a little further, but we will definitely consider accommodations if those are needed. The next question, I'm going to ask David to answer this one. It is in regards to criteria 4 and 5. And the question is, what is the difference between a cannabis business and a cannabis social enterprise as defined within the application process?
They were referencing which one now? For
Criteria 4 and 5 of social equity eligibility. So what is the difference between a cannabis business and a cannabis social enterprise?
I can help with that if you like.
Sure, Tim. Why don't you cover that?
Well, a cannabis business is just a standard licensed business by the state. We've talked about the criteria for that in yesterday's webinar. A cannabis social enterprise is a little bit different in that it is also a cannabis business, but it is specifically engaged in incubating and or helping individuals who meet the first 2 criteria for social equity and who use commercial strategies to improve financial, social, or environmental conditions in the disadvantaged community that it's located in. So it's got more of a nonprofit type of flavor. It can be structured as a for-profit or a nonprofit organization. It might take the form of a cooperative. It might take the form of a charity organization. But it is defined in the ordinance. If anyone wants to read it, it's a rather lengthy definition at 9-3316B6.
Thank you. The next question is, the applications must include all criteria in sections 1, 2, 3, and 7 in Appendix A and will be due by 4 p.m. on January 8th, 2021, January 8th, 2021. The question is, what is due November 13th, 2020? So November 13th is the date that the standard application form that we went through in the portal with all of your basic information and your social equity eligibility documentation. So if you're claiming low income, when you go to the attachments in the application, you'll see social equity or supporting eligibility documents. You provide documentation demonstrating your eligibility. So if that's cannabis conviction, some kind of document showing that, or if it's a family member cannabis conviction, documentation showing that, low income, last year's tax return. So those details are shown on the attachment in the application portal and are related to whatever criteria you are claiming as far as eligibility for the social equity application process. The next question is, who or which departments in the city staff will be on the interview panel? So we're not providing the names of the reviewers at this point, just that it will be an internal review panel selected based on the expertise for different subject areas. It's set up, the applications are reviewed section by section by different reviewers. So it is not one reviewer per application, but multiple reviewers assigned to different sections of every application based on their subject matter expertise. Next question is, am I able to bring my team with me to the interview process? What technology is available to accommodate team members who might not be available due to the COVID-19 pandemic, or identify as part of the medically vulnerable populations. So the exact specifications of the interview process have not been confirmed yet. However, they will be confirmed as we get closer to that phase. You will be able to bring team members with you, but depending on our space, we may need to limit the number of people, and we will confirm the available technology prior to the interviews. Certainly, at the very least, a PowerPoint or similar presentation will be available, but we will confirm additional specifications as we get closer to that interview phase. And then my last question before I move on to the question Q&A box is, will we be using the standard CCB permit application to complete the distribution, manufacturing, and cultivation sections? Is this just an adjunct application for part of the above mentioned sections? So all applications for all permit types use the same application. This question specifically references section 1.7, 1.8, and 1.9. So those are part of the business plan. The business plan is submitted as a PDF attachment. So depending on the type of permit, the type of business you're proposing, if you want to do cultivation, then you're going to respond in your business plan to 1.9. Obviously, if you're just doing cultivation, you don't need to respond to 1.7, 1.8 distribution manufacturing because you're not doing that type of business. However, as mentioned before, if you choose micro business, which is distribution, manufacturing, and cultivation, then you do need to respond to all three of those. But again, that is part of your business plan, and the entire business plan is one PDF attachment in the application. Okay, so I'm going to move on to our questions in the Q&A box. So if you haven't typed your questions yet, you may continue to do so. The first one is there a place where we can access the recorded version of the webinars? There will be on our website. It'll be later this week. We have to get it prepared and uploaded. So I don't have an exact time, but it will be on our website, both the social equity webinar and the standard application webinar, including copies of our presentation, the PowerPoint. The next question, is it correct that the social equity application is due 11/13 as opposed to the standard application on 12/4? This is sort of correct in that there is a due date of November 13th, but it is not for all of your application materials. Like in the standard application, the date of December 4th, all of their application materials are due on December 4th. For social equity, the only thing due on November 13th is the basic application form in the portal, which are the screens that Tom went through. And the only attachment that is due is those supporting documents that show how you claim eligibility as a social equity applicant. What that's going to do and what we will do is to confirm that eligibility as soon as possible after that due date and connect you with the technical assistant resource so that you can receive technical assistance for the next due date materials that are due. Any questions or assistance you might need on that, you'll be connected with that resource to be able to access. The next question is, can I apply for social equity in Fresno if my arrest was in Los Angeles? We do not limit the location of the cannabis conviction. So as long as you meet the other criteria, the fact that that occurred in Los Angeles does not disqualify you. The next question, let's see. So are you suggesting I can start making a lot of money to get through the process, or I'll get kicked out for not being low income anymore? If I'm understanding this question correctly, the income requirements are just eligibility for the social equity application process. Once you demonstrate that you're eligible for that and you submit your application, we wouldn't ask for your income in regards to eligibility at any time after that. Obviously the business, or hopefully the business would generate an income. That's the intention of it. So that is not an ongoing requirement. It is just to make you eligible for this application process. The next question is the insurance that we're looking for just simple general liability insurance, or is there a specific kind of insurance required? There is some insurance requirements in the code. Let me see if I can reference that really quick. If not, it's something that we will have to confirm. General liability certainly is required. See if it has that. So section 9-333, you must maintain, and it's B, 9-333B. You must maintain insurance at coverage limits with conditions thereon determined necessary and appropriate from time to time by the city manager. So basic business insurance to cover that operation. But again, that is not due until phase 5. The next question is, there are 14 retail spots available based on council districts. Does that mean there is up to 4 social equity retail license opportunities available? Yes, that is correct. There are 10 interview slots available. Is that per license type? Yes, that is per license type. Does retail include non-storefront retail? We do not have non-storefront retail in Fresno. The next question is, how much funds are currently in the reinvestment fund? How can social equity applicants access the affordable commercial real estate and access to investment capital mentioned in the Fresno Community Reinvestment Fund? That fund has just been established and it still needs to be funded. So that's something that access will come at a later time. And unfortunately, I can't give you an exact date. As mentioned before, that the fund was offered as a potential way for the standard cannabis business application companies to contribute to that fund to help fund it. In addition, the state equity grants are coming up again, and we're hopeful to be able to partially fund it there. So the answer to that is it is not funded or accessible yet, but we hope to have that funded and accessible very soon. The next question is, how many total points will the social equity application be graded on? Is there a minimum number of points a social equity applicant needs to move along to each phase? So I'm going to take a stab at answering that. And David, if I missed anything and you'd like to add, please do. But for the social equity application process, phase 2 is pass or fail. So as long as you meet the requirements that are in the procedures, you will move on to phase 3 interviews. Phase 3, in which you'll provide proof of capital and location. Again, that is pass, fail. And as long as you meet those requirements, you'll move on to the interview. The interview is where it'll be force ranked. So it's not necessarily a score, but every applicant will be force ranked based on their interview and the information provided during the interview. And then at that point, the city will determine which applicants would move on to the next phase. Is there anything you want to add to that, David?
No, you did a good job of explaining that.
Okay. Next question, must all social equity applicants use the city's application assistance? It seems like if everyone is using the same consultant, the responses will not be differentiated. The answer to that is no. The technical assistance offered is not required. It is up to the applicant to access that. We will still provide you that information, but it is up to the applicant to follow through in requesting that information. And the fact that, the technical assistance may result in, similar information in the responses is part of the reason why the written information is not scored. It's pass or fail until you move on to the interview process. The next question asks for clarification on the requirements for 4 and 6. I'm not sure if that's referencing the sections or the eligibility. So I think we're going to need some more clarification on what you need there. Next question, does low income household mean how much money the social equity applicant makes per year, or if they live in a low income area? So let's see, which slide was that? We have the definition. Low income household whose gross income does not exceed 80% of the area median income for Fresno County. That is the definition of low income household. The next question says, I started an application, but erroneously chose no for the first 2 questions. So what that's going to mean is it did not pull in your background check form, which is okay. As we mentioned, you can go to the main page of the portal, scroll down and complete your background form separately. But if you answered no to the second question, then it's going to give you the standard cannabis business application, not the social equity application. So if you do not want to do the standard application process, then do not continue with that application. Don't complete it, don't submit it, and instead continue drafting and ultimately submit your social equity application. David, maybe you can help me with this next one. It says, there are no owners in a nonprofit. How would you put ownership percentage if in this case? I think you're muted, David.
Yeah, so I think they're referring to a co-op and collective. We would have to look in the system of how we would modify that, or if they would just designate that. So we will follow up with you. We have to talk to Tom about how we would do that. I'm assuming you're saying it's a co-op and collective. So we would have to prepare a way to comment on that.
Okay. In addition, I do see that, what section is that? Oh, in the definitions in the ordinance, the definition of owner, number 2 includes number 2 and 3. Number 2 in the definition of owner is the manager of a nonprofit or other entity. And number 3 is a member of the board of directors of a nonprofit. So I think you could, and we can clarify this in an FAQ, but if you have 5 directors on your board for your nonprofit, then you can enter them as equal owners for the nonprofit. David, do you think that would work?
I think that would be a reasonable test, but we probably should put it in writing for clarity.
Okay. The next question is, does the 51% social equity applicant have to be the lead person in the interview? You want to answer that one, David?
So the interview, the panel will be looking at everyone's contribution to the interview based on the questions asked and their technical experience to answer the question. So we can't specifically say that, but for example, you could have someone that's knowledgeable in the security plan, and you may have someone's on operations, and you may have someone on financial. So it really just looks at your team. Remember, you're looking at the qualifications of the team when you get to that interview and how you respond in that interview.
Thank you. The next question is, would you recommend to include sections that aren't due yet if they have been completed? And I would say if you're confident that you're not going to change that section at all, then it wouldn't hurt to go ahead and include it. That way it's done and you can see it there in the system. But if you think you might make some changes to it, then just wait, because I don't think that it would take effort to try to go back and change that in the system from the city's end. So make sure whatever you're uploading is the final version.
And just to comment on that, Jennifer, the timing, if you're talking, 48 hours out from deadline was one thing. If we're talking it's done today, is that you might get more information. You may get more responses to Q&As. Things might change as far as information gathering, way you want to approach that. You want to go in and do edits. You don't want to shortchange yourself by prematurely putting it in there. So, and that's very common that could occur. So back to Jennifer's comment, just be, once you hit that button, you can't go back and make the edits. So don't do it too prematurely to some degree, unless you're 100% confident.
The next question is, I was a foster child and adopted, so how do I go forward showing both my parents' convictions? My last name on my birth certificate was changed. So the family member conviction is only one of the ways that you could qualify. So if that doesn't apply to you, or you're not sure because you can't access those documents, then you would apply using a different criteria, one of the other criteria listed in those 6. In addition, you might have a family member that has a conviction, but if they're not willing to provide you the court documentation that shows that, then unfortunately you wouldn't be able to claim that. That is a voluntary field, and so you would need to be able to provide the court documentation showing that. And if you don't have it, I would suggest that you look and see if you qualify for under a different social equity criteria. The next question, see, David, this one references your comment, so maybe you can take this one. It is, to clarify, the city is stating that it is not okay for an individual who owns 20% or more in a social equity business to also own 20% or more of a non-social equity business. Mr. McPherson stated that an individual could not be listed as an owner on a social equity application and a general application.
That is correct. So the goal here is that, social equity applicants should be on one side or the other. The intent here is that we're trying to give the social equity applicants a greater opportunity when there's only potentially 2 out of 2 licenses for each category, or 2 for retail and 2 non-retail. And so if you feel that you're going to apply for one or the other, you're going to meet different standards, and we're trying to keep them separate, and you just need to make a business decision on which way you want to go.
And the intention of that is to really protect the social equity applicants. As David mentioned in the beginning, there are unfortunately predatory companies out there, and we really want our social equity program to benefit our social equity applicants. In addition to that, the code actually has a minimum and a maximum of social equity permits. So, I mean, technically, if you have somebody who submitted a social equity application, then that's going to apply to that minimum or maximum. And if they also applied to the standard, you know, they're technically a social equity applicant, and we have to adhere to that as well. The next question is, how many points do I lose if I'm not from Fresno? Should I have someone from Fresno join my application to make it stronger? You want to take that one, David?
That's purely a business decision. You obviously understand that this is a scored element, and strategically how you approach this is each individual business's decision to how to put their best foot forward.
The next question is, if an individual meets criteria 3, low income household, either A or B, what is the amount of the annual income that is considered low? That is 80% of the median annual income. See, I think I had that written down. So going from the 2018 numbers that were published, the average household median income for County of Fresno is $51,261. So 80% of that, $41,008 would be considered, or less, would be considered low income. The next question is, can 2 applicants applying separately apply on the same property? Will this impact consideration for approval? It will not impact consideration for approval, but I'm going to ask David if you want to talk about what happens when an applicant applies for the same property. You're muted.
So yeah, if you apply it, you know, let's say you're, let's say for example, retail, that person is number 6 on the list and you're number 8 on the list, that there's a requirement of buffers between the distances for the 2 businesses. So you're basically taking a chance that you or the other person will not be one of the 2 people that are being awarded the permit for the same category. So if that's the case, then the person with the higher approval rate will be the first one selected, which will disqualify you as the second operator for the same type of activity.
Thank you. The next question is it was mentioned that the city is taking both medical and recreational applications. What are the differences in the application process, point systems, and allotted CCBs per district? So there is no difference. It's all one ordinance, one application process, and it's simply up to the applicant to determine if they would like to do medical and adult use. But there is not a separate process. All of the permit limitations still exist. The next question is criteria number 4. If there are more than 1 owners in the social enterprise, all of their percentages should add up to 51%, because you can't have more than 1 person with 51%. Do you understand that question, David?
You need
Seems
to
a
look
little
at it again.
confusing to me.
Criteria number 4, if there are more than 1 owners in social enterprise, all of their percentage should add up to 51%, because you can't have more than 1 person. I'm not sure what they're trying to say here either. Criteria 4, if there are more than 1 owners in social enterprise. So you don't necessarily, if 1 person, well, so I guess the question would be is if you had 1 person that was 40%, and you had another one that was 11%, or two that were at 25.5%, but the total of social enterprise is 51%. Would that qualify? Is how I would interpret that.
Yeah. And then the last line there, because you can't have more than one person with 51%, I would just say to that, like, your ownership, as mentioned in the application, needs to add up to 100%. And the 51% is the minimum you need to be eligible for social equity. If you have more than that, if 100% qualifies for social equity, that's great. But 51% is the minimum in order to qualify for social equity. The next question, if I only meet criteria 3, must I own a minimum of 51%, or do I only have to show a majority ownership? A majority ownership is at least 51%. So it would need to be that or more. The next question, the social equity application guidelines for phase 1 states, city staff will review the materials to determine eligibility under the city's criteria in section 9-3316B4, but section B4 is the collective bargaining agreement provision. So that must be a typo without having the procedures in front of me. It would be B6, which is the social equity criteria. Oh yeah, I do see that. So it should be B6. So I know we have that correction, which I will note. And then, as I mentioned earlier, that November 13th date in one area there, we'll make those corrections. Thank you for pointing that out.
So Jennifer, before we go too on, I wanted to kind of read back to the percentage thing in here. If you look at the breakdown that says businesses with no less than 51% ownership by individuals, emphasis individuals, not individual, who meet criteria 1 and 2. So that combination that gets there, again, example of someone could be 30%, another person could be 40%, that gets you over the 51% because it's individuals, not a single person, plural.
Thank you. The next question is, how can I show proof of satisfying criteria 6? Can proof of local permit or some ownership documentation be eligible? David, do you have the criteria, or hold on, I got it here. So criteria 6 for eligibility, an individual with a membership interest in a cannabis business formed as a cooperative. What documentation would they provide for that, David?
So there's a variety of it. You have mutual beneficial corporation papers. You have article papers that have been adopted and approved. You show proof that you got a state license, because even though you would be a co-op and collective, you're still required to have a state license or be approved from that. So if you need to, if that's not clear, you can contact staff for clarification or give examples if you're trying to show something that's a unique situation that we can examine.
Thank you. The next question is, there are 14 retail spots available based on council districts. Does that mean there's up to 4 social equity retail license opportunities available? Yes. There are 10 interview slots available per license type. Yes. Oh, I think I already answered this question. Does retail include non-storefront retail? And that answer is no, because we do not have non-storefront retail in Fresno.
But just the way it's worded, just so if we didn't get it right either, you said delivery. So if you are a retailer and you're approved to do retail, they would be permitted to do delivery as well. There's just not 2 different licenses.
Okay.
Is that correct, Jennifer? Or are they not permitted to do delivery at all?
Oh,
think I was,
yeah, if they have a storefront retail, they may do delivery.
okay.
We just don't have delivery only permits.
So we just want to make sure not how the person asked the question, they might have not framed it right, but if you do retail, you will be permitted to do deliveries, but you can't apply for a non-storefront permit on its own without being a retail storefront.
Thank you. The next question says, I missed some information due to connectivity issues. Would you clarify what is meant by social equities? For that, I would suggest that this webinar will be available, recorded version will be available on our website later in this week, so you can go back and watch it. The next question is, if you've been a lifelong resident of Fresno but had resided in Clovis briefly, are you still eligible? So there is some consideration given for county versus city. So certainly submit your information as it is. There is a local preference, but it doesn't necessarily disqualify you.
So just a thought on that, Jennifer, I guess part of the other question in there, to be an applicant as well, it says in the ordinance that 10 years cumulative residency in a zip code identified by that, but it doesn't say current. So the question could be the person lived here for 20 years, but he recently moved to Clovis. So he's not current, but he did for 19 out of the last 20 years. Would he meet that criteria? If that's the question you're asking, please provide an additional question to staff to clarify that.
The next question is, will I be able to open my social equity business sooner than general businesses? Meaning, will our phases end before the general license process? We expect that it'll all be happening simultaneously. Even though social equity have a little more time to submit their materials, once everything is submitted, the process of reviews all occur at the same time. We expect to be doing interviews at the same time, and therefore, as far as opening your business, it's really going to depend on the time it takes to get your facility ready. That might take longer for some people than others. But as far as just like the approval process, it's in sync with the standard application process. This next question is one that it looks like we answered, but there's still some confusion on. So there are 14 retail spots available based on council districts. Does that mean there is up to 4 social equity retail licenses available? You answered yes. Can you explain? This is explained in the ordinance. It was also explained earlier on in my PowerPoint presentation. It means, let me go back to that slide actually, just so it's very clear. Okay, so there are 14 cannabis retail businesses within the city, and they have to be only 2 per city council district. An additional 7 could be authorized by city council. And here's the social equity component. Of those 14, at least 1, but a maximum of 2 per every 7. So yes, that could be up to 4 of the 14 would be equity applicants. Hopefully that makes it a little more clear. It's my understanding that there are 7 council districts, meaning at a minimum, there would be 7 social equity businesses and a max of 14. No, there are 7 council districts. So the 2 per district adds up to the 14. And the social equity are 4 of those. So it's all a total of 14. The next question is, can I apply if I'm not from Fresno? If you meet the social equity criteria, you may apply. and just understand in the criteria, there is a local preference. So just keep that in mind. The next question, will asking for technical assistance delay my application? The answer is no. We've set the due dates in mind to give applicants enough time to access their technical assistance. So it should not delay your application. The next question is, can you explain what is an individual with a membership interest in a cannabis formed as a cooperative? David, would you take that one?
Well, a co-op and collective or a co-op has its, there's a formation of that has bylaws and requirements of how it's formed. We do not want to provide legal or advice on how that it is. There's lots of information on there. You may wish to contact an attorney or a consultant that has information of that. But this process, that if you're trying to look at it from this point forward and not already there, this application process would be closed by the time you would actually get anything formulated, formed for that.
So then this would apply only if you already,
An existing
if
co-op,
that, or
yeah.
yeah, an existing.
Unless you, yeah, it would pretty much in the time frame be difficult to run.
The next question is, what kind of requirements for a local applicant? Mailing address, okay. Length of residency. So when you enter your ownership information into the application form, that is where we will see your address. So yes, that will show us your residency. And length of residency. David, would you help me respond to that one?
Yeah, I think we put it in here that it has to be by a certain date, the adoption of the ordinance.
Oh, that's right.
And then the other part is that it's the criteria of length of time in here of, 5 years, 10 years. There's different things that the residency thing is noted in here. Mail-in address would not work. It has to be a place that needs to be verified with documentation and proof of that, which is on the application.
The next question is in reference to one that I read earlier, just clarifying. So I shouldn't start a new application if I erroneously chose no for the first two questions. That depends on if you want to apply for social equity. When you answered no, it's directing you to the standard application process. So if you want to participate in the standard application process and not social equity, then you may continue as is. If you want to apply through social equity, then you need to start a new one and select yes for social equity criteria so that you'll be directed to that application. The next question is, what resource can I find out the median household income for my area of town? The median income is for the Fresno County. I answered that earlier, and also in the slides, you'll see the resource for that. Let's see, since I have it up here. It is here. Oh, that's the living wage. The household income, so we can post the link to that, but it's the census information on median household income for Fresno County. The next question is, what convictions are they looking for? If you're referencing the convictions in the background check that may potentially disqualify you, those are, do you have the reference for that, David?
I don't, but I guess the
Okay.
question's a little vague. If they're asking to qualify, it says low-income households and either a past conviction for a cannabis crime or immediate family member with a past conviction for a cannabis crime. So if the question is to be eligible, that's specific in there. If you're asking of what could be a disqualifier, then that's would meet the state requirements of what would be a disqualifier in that, or what's listed in the ordinance that you can read through.
Yeah, and it's also referenced when you start your background application. It will show you the potential disqualifiers there. And then as David mentioned, if you're looking for qualifiers, it's going to be any cannabis related conviction. The next question is, if my sibling was convicted of a cannabis charge and is applying for a retail license, can I also apply separately using him as my qualifying family member? David, would you take this one?
It shouldn't have a conflict unless the problem may be is that if you try to both apply for more than the maximum each.
Okay. So there's another question about if we can restate where to find eligible convictions. The eligible convictions, again, are any cannabis related convictions. And the disqualifying elements are, let's see, I think I can pull that up. In the ordinance, section 9-3302, commercial cannabis. Sorry, no, that's not it.
The eligible is
Okay.
9-3316B, and I think you indicated 6, that we had a typo on it.
Okay. And 93318 of the ordinance, 9-3318, is persons prohibited from holding a commercial cannabis business permit. That is where you'll find information on convictions that could possibly disqualify you from being issued a permit. The next question is, I was unaware of the standard application process yesterday. How may I access this information? The webinar will be posted on our website later this week.
And the application is currently online.
Yes. The next question, David, if you could take this one. It's, will the net worth also be considered as disqualification, or is it based solely on income? Example, a wealthy individual that didn't work or had zero income for the last several years.
We are going to need to get clarification from that and put it on the Q&A.
Okay. The next question is, if we have several cannabis buildings within a parcel, is there a distance requirement between buildings? Yes, there is a distance requirement. Let me see if I can pull that up. I can pull it up quickly, and if not, we will have to respond to that in the FAQ. But it would be under the ordinance information. Okay, so it's 9-3307C. All buildings in which a cannabis retail business is located shall be no closer than 800 feet from any property containing, and then A is a cannabis retail business. So cannabis retail businesses must be at least 800 feet away from each other.
And as Jennifer noted earlier, the zones are all wholesale or non-retail businesses are zoned differently than retail. So I guess the question that Jennifer here could be is, if I have a cultivation in building 1 and I have a manufacturer in building 2 and a distributor in building 3, and they're all on the same property, is there a distance requirement between buildings or licenses?
Oh, for the commercial cannabis business type. So for the commercial cannabis business types, it does not have the same requirement, but it does have to be 1,000 feet from a residential. But within that area, they could be, there is no requirement like retail of the distance between those buildings. Did I explain that clearly?
I'm just giving different interpretations of the question because
Okay.
it was kind of generic. So if we didn't answer that, please let us know.
Okay. The next question, the 5-year cumulative in 3B, does it have to be ongoing or can you have moved? David, would you take this one?
Yeah, it says cumulative. So cumulative is not consecutively.
Okay. So there's some clarification about the percentage again. And again, as long as your ownership adds up to 100%, the number of people that make up that 100% is up to you.
So Jennifer, just for the rest of the audience, if they're not seeing the question, someone clarified that they meant 5 people make 51% and 2 and others generate the 49%. And that was the answer Jennifer gave them.
Thank you. The next question is there guidance as to which documents are sufficient to support social equity criteria? There is guidance to that in when you go into the application portal and look at that attachment. It describes there for the different criteria what may qualify. And if there is another document you have that you believe demonstrates that criteria that isn't referenced, you can check with our office just to make sure that that would qualify. The next question is what qualifies as family for a conviction qualification? I believe it says immediate family.
Immediate,
Yeah,
yes.
so it's immediate family. The next question is, can we share with your staff verification of equity criteria before the November 13th deadline? You can go ahead and upload that criteria at any time into the application portal. The next question is the 10 retail interviews include social equity and general applicant process? The 10 retail interviews are just for the social equity process. The 10 retail interview lottery process is not included in the general applicant guidelines. That is correct, and that is because in the standard application process, they go through a scoring process. And that indicates the number of permits. Did you want to add anything to that, David?
No, I think that's the reason why, yeah, they are separate.
Okay.
They are not in the same.
I wasn't sure if I was covering everything with that answer. And the last part of that is, does that mean the city does not intend on issuing 14 retail licenses? We will be issuing all 14. So when it talks about the 10 in the social equity application procedures, that is just for the social equity interviews. The next question is, where can we access the vacant buildings list? The registry is actually a requirement for property owners to, they must register their building in the registry if it is or will be vacant for 30 days or more. As far as accessing a list of those properties, I would need to clarify to see if that's available. But if you're discussing with a property owner, they should know, because that is a city requirement that they register if their building is vacant or will be vacant for 30 days or more. The next question, David, if you could take this one, I'm not too sure, but the question is, does immediate family include step parents?
I would think that would qualify as immediate.
Okay. We can confirm that.
Yep.
Just a few more questions we have. The next one is, does the family member with a qualified conviction have to be an owner? The answer to that is no. Could the qualifying individual be currently incarcerated? I believe the answer to that is yes. Correct me if I'm wrong, David, as long as that you're talking about the individual incarcerated is the family member and they do have a past cannabis conviction.
I would, off the top of my head, concur that with you, but we can validate that. And if we are incorrect, we can, well, in either way, we're going to put that on the Q&A. So again, double check the Q&A to make sure there is no change in our response.
Yeah, the second part of that question is a little unclear. I assume they're talking about the family member and not the business owner. The next question is, if you file jointly with a spouse, do we take the whole household income or just the income of the individual? If you're talking about eligibility criteria, it is a household income. So it's the average household income. This would be for the whole household. The next question is confirming the definition of immediate family. Immediate family refers to a person's smallest family unit consisting of the closest relatives, such as parents, siblings, and children. Immediate family may contain both biological relatives and those related through marriage, such as a brother-in-law. Would a half brother and sister count if the same dad? I think this is something we should confirm in writing, but at my look at this, it looks to be good. David, would you say the same?
Yep, and I think we appreciate you providing us that description. We would present it to the attorneys to make sure that we're on the same page. If not, either way, you will get a response to that Q&A.
The last written question we have is, can a family member be a person your parents had court-appointed guardianship of? What would you say about that one, Dave?
I think we need to provide that as part of that questions on all the definitions on that to the attorney.
Okay. So we will confirm this one in writing. Okay, if there's anyone who needs to ask their question verbally. Oh, thank you. We got some thank yous, so that's nice to see. Thank you. But if there's anybody that needs to ask their question verbally, please go ahead and raise your hand so I can unmute you. I don't see any here, which means we've finished our question and answers. And I'll bring up our last screen here, which is our contact information. So I want to thank everybody for participating today. And just remember that the webinar recording and PowerPoint will be on our website soon, hopefully later this week. You can reach out to us at this email address or phone number if you have additional questions, but just remember that these questions that were asked today and any we get in between now and then, we will also post to the website. So it's a good idea to check there first, because it's probable that your question's already been answered. It will take us a little while to get those posted as we go through them, and prepare them to post, but we will do that as soon as possible. So thank you everyone for participating today. Thank you to our panelists for sharing your information, and everybody have a good day. That concludes our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.